Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to be talking about the latest in the Hans Niemann versus Magnus Carlsen controversy. If you like content like this, please hit that subscribe button and click on your notification icon. Now, one of the biggest issues in this controversy, in my opinion, has nothing to do with whether or not Hans Niemann cheated. I don't care what side of the fence you're on that argument, whether you believe he cheated or whether you believe he didn't. One of the biggest issues that we have to deal with right now is understanding the ethics and the etiquette of chess and trying to bring back the ethics and the etiquette of chess in a way where we have people behaving in a way that is both ethical and shows the proper etiquette towards the game of chess. So this is the latest news right now. Niemann says this game is a message to everyone, and if you don't know what happened, Hans Niemann won his first round game, and then in the post game, he basically refused to analyze the game. You know, he was asked questions about the game, and he just said, this game speaks for itself, and he walked off. And that's not cool. You know, when you sign up for a top-level event like this, the post-game analysis is just basic common courtesy. It's part of the etiquette of the game. You're expected to give that post-game analysis as part of you showing up for the tournament. And there's been a lot of behavior within this entire controversy from the top levels of chess that have been completely uncool. Magnus Carlsen withdrawing from an event. Nobody else withdrew from that event. Whether or not Hans Niemann cheated in that event or cheated in the past has no bearing on whether or not Magnus Carlsen should have withdrawn from that event. It's been stated that Carlsen had previous suspicions of Hans Niemann before the tournament started. Then that was the time to withdraw. Actually, Hans Niemann himself was a replacement for a player, rapport, that could not make it to the event. Magnus Carlsen could have easily withdrew as soon as he found out that Niemann was a replacement, and they could have replaced Magnus Carlsen with somebody. And we would not have this controversy at all, and we would not have this discussion about all of this unethical and breaching of etiquette of behavior between the two players. So, I want to talk a little bit about what the etiquette of chess is and why we have the etiquette of chess for those of you, and especially for those young players out there that don't understand the etiquette or don't even think that we should have etiquette in chess, that if it follows the rules that you're allowed to do it. I hear that a lot, and that is just not correct. You need to respect the etiquette of the game, and you need to respect the basic underlying ethics and underlying courtesy of just chess and life and everything in general, because that's really how we all get along. So, one of the ethical and etiquette things that was really getting hotly debated when I was a younger player was, of course, the etiquette of draws and the etiquette of resigning. Like, when do you take a draw? When do you resign? And I had a bunch of experiences when I was a younger player that kind of revolved around this concept. So, basically, let's just take a look at a couple of my games when I was a much younger player. I was playing the black pieces in this game, and my opponent was a player by the name of Don Aldrich. This was being played in the Minnesota Open. Now, at the time, I was a relatively low-rated player. Now, I don't recall if this game was actually played at 96 or 95. I played this game, I was either 13 or 14 when I played this game. I was definitely a younger player, and I was very low-rated at the time. I was rated maybe 1400. Now, my first game, I had a good result. I actually beat a master in my first game. Which was unexpected. You know, 1400s don't usually beat. He didn't have the master rating at the time. He was rated about 2100 at the time, but, you know, 1400s, generally speaking, don't beat people that are rated 700 points above them, so nobody really expected that. Game 2, I lost to Edward Zalkund, who was a very strong master. He was, you know, in the 2300s back then. And then Game 3, I got paired to Don Aldrich, who was a solid expert player. And I ended up outplaying him, and I got this position with the black pieces. Don Aldrich offered me a draw as the higher-rated player. He was playing white. He offered me a draw, and I declined. And after the game, he got really upset, and he informed me that it was just a breach of etiquette to decline that draw. When the higher-rated player offers a draw, that the lower-rated player should accept it because it's just... And he said, this position is a book draw anyway, so you should absolutely accept it. Now, I was fortunate. Back then, a whole bunch of strong players came to my defense, and they said, no, this position is not a book draw, and he has every right to play for a win. And this is where etiquette gets kind of fuzzy, like back then. The idea of when you should accept and when you should decline draw offers, or when it's okay to offer a draw, or when it's okay to resign, or when it's not okay to resign, has to do with just basic human courtesy. So what it is if you are wasting your opponent's time, you should be accepting a draw. Like, if it's a dead draw position and you're wasting your opponent's time and it's clear that everyone has the appropriate knowledge, It is a waste of, you're wasting his time by playing the position out. That's the concept behind the etiquette of draw offers and accepting a draw, and also the etiquette of resignation. I mean, if your opponent has, if you both have hours and hours on the clock, and you have an extra queen or something, and there's no chances in the position at all, you're not supposed to sit there and think for 20 minutes a move and waste your opponent's time that he could spend doing literally anything else. He could go get a cup of coffee. He could go have dinner with his family. You're wasting his time to play a position that is pointless. You're not changing the result of the game. And that's kind of where the etiquette of chess comes from. It comes from basic human courtesy and basic human decency. It is, of course, not against the rules to play out every single position, but you're not being respectful to your opponent's time. And that is why we have the etiquette for draw offers and things like that. A great example that I could use is in life, we have etiquette and we have ethics. If you're in the supermarket with your elderly grandmother, and somebody comes up and starts saying obscenities to her, not raising their voice, so they're not disturbing the peace, not making any threats, so they're not threatening her, they're not technically breaking any rules by simply walking up to her and randomly saying obscenities. But we do accept that this is not proper behavior. We accept that this is unethical behavior, that we shouldn't be doing this. We accept that this is a breach of etiquette. Okay? So, like in this game, it's kind of interesting. I just want to give a little bit of analysis of this game. These positions, king, queen, and pawn versus king and queen, are not always draws, and they're not always wins. It really depends on how far up the board the pawn is. It depends on the position of your opponent's king. If the king is like over here, for example, or in one of these pockets over here, this is considered the danger zone. The kings are a lot safer if they're really far away from the pawn. The best location for the king to get a draw is directly in front of the pass pawn. If the king is directly in front of the pass pawn, these positions are supposed to be kind of draws all the time. But yeah, in this particular case, it turns out that black was actually winning. Now, I was unable to win the game. I tried for 30 moves to advance the pawn, and I managed to advance the pawn all the way to the 6th rank, but never did manage to get it to the 7th. But as it turns out, table bases confirmed that black was winning here. So an example of how to do it, and it's very, very difficult. But this king happens to be in the danger zone. And because the king is in the danger zone, it makes it a very winnable position. So this is kind of the technique. You would have to avoid this myriad of checks until eventually you can push the pawn one more square. And then the real trick, and I got it this far, but the real trick is finagling this king into the proper position so that you can push the pawn a couple further squares. And you need to gain those tempos, and you need to push the pawn at the appropriate moment and get the king to the most dangerous square. And now, of course, it's running around with your king a lot, and you have to avoid check, but you have to avoid check in just the right way so that eventually he has to check you in a place where you can counter check with effect. So essentially, you have to force his king into the correct location. You have to get your king out of the way of the pawn, and then set up a situation where you have a counter check. So right here, you would have finally kind of achieved everything, except you are still pinned. And this is all best play according to the engine and according to the table base. So now you have to break the pin, and you have to set up the counter check. So here, you would break the pin, they would pin you again, you would put your queen in the appropriate location, and that actually avoids the repin. So now there's no repin, and now every single possible check that they have with, like, say, queen f4 or queen c6 is going to be subject to a counter check, which will exchange queens. So this is actually really, really difficult. Like, I don't know if I would even be able to do it. I mean, it's so difficult, I don't know if I would necessarily be able to do it even now, and I actually know the correct technique now. Like, I know where the king needs to be located. I know how to centrally locate my queen on, like, say, the d4, e4, or e6 squares. I know the general rules and the general principles of how to go about trying. But even now, if I played against really good competition, or if I had to play this against a computer, I don't know if I would be able to necessarily win it even now. But it's a borderline enough position that you have every right to try in a tournament, so you should not be obligated ethically to accept a draw. Of course, these days, that's not the problem. Of course, these days, people, they never resign. You know, that you can be down 2 queens in a totally winning position, and they never resign. And I understand part of this. The Blitz chess online has really eroded the ethics and the etiquette of chess because we're not playing as much slow chess. So even if you waste your opponent's time, how much of your opponent's time can you possibly be wasting? What, 2 minutes, 1 minute? And it's arguable in almost any position that if your opponent has less than 30 seconds on the clock, stalemate suddenly becomes a possibility. It's very easy to blunder in any position when we're playing with so little time, and with time controls being so short. It's hard to justify the old etiquette of resignation and the old etiquette of resigning or offering draws or accepting draws, even if positions are dead draws. Even that being said, I do think that even in a blitz game, if you have a dead drawn position and each side has 30 seconds left, it's a little unethical to sit there and just move your pieces back and forth and hope that you can beat the 50 move rule or beat the 3 move repetition rule to get a win when the position is clearly a draw. It's a shady win. It's a really dirty kind of win. And it's really questionable if we should be doing that. But still, blitz chess really blurs the lines, because in slow chess it was like, okay, look, there's really no possibility of the result changing. Everybody's got 2 or 3 hours on the clock or whatever. Please don't waste our time. Let's just agree to a result, and everybody, do whatever else they want to do with the rest of their day. That's the baseline for the etiquettes of chess. So I have kind of another example of this. Like, it used to be thought that like king, bishop, and rook versus king and rook is a draw, no matter what. But of course it's not. There are select situations and select circumstances where these positions are not a draw. So an example would be like this position right here. Like if we just set up to this position, this is actually a really incredible position, because yes, black can draw, but there is only one move that draws. Like every move in this position is a loss for black in this case, because his king is actually very close to being in a mating net here. Every single move in this position is a loss except one. The only move that draws is rook f1. And it's really strange why it draws. So like if you play like another move, for instance, like even if rook, let's say rook g1, which would on the surface appear to be, isn't this the same move? No, it's not. After rook a3, we would be absolutely dead here. We're threatening this checkmate. We have to sidestep it somehow. We don't have a sideways check because the bishop covers it. So we'd have to check from behind. After we check from behind, the bishop blocks, and now the mating net is sealed. So this is kind of the basic underpinning on how you can lose these positions with the black pieces and how easy it is to lose these positions. After rook f1, you can disrupt the net. So after rook f1, rook a3, you could simply play rook f6 check, king e5, rook f2, and you would have a relatively equal position. And eventually, according to the table base, this position can be a draw. But because there are so many positions, even starting from here, where you can walk into these weird and strange mating nets, white would have every right to play for a win until you get a 3-move repetition or until you hit the 50-move rule, even though we know for a fact that once you get here, if we put this in a table base, it's a draw. Just because a position is table-based as a draw doesn't mean that your opponent has an obligation to accept the draw and to shake hands. And we saw this in the World Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Niemann, where the table bases were spitting out a draw, but Magnus Carlsen still managed to find a way to win, so he of course had every right to continue to play for that win. Now, I've given you 2 examples where I behaved ethically and, my opponents behaved kind of, unethically, demanding that I take a draw in a position where I had chances. But let me show you a situation where I accepted a draw, in a situation where ethically and according to my understanding of the etiquette of chess, I think I had an obligation to play for a win. And it's weird, like you would think I have a right to take whatever result I want as a player, right? But ethics and etiquette aren't just about me and my opponent, and this is something that I did not understand when I was a younger player, and I understand it now. I was playing in the Minnesota Closed Championship back in 2001. I think it was 2001, might have been 2002, might have been 2000. All this stuff happened over 20 years ago. My memory's a little fuzzy. I do still remember the game to this day. I reconstructed this game from memory. And I'm almost positive I got all the moves right, even though it happened over 20 years ago. But this game really stuck in my mind as something that I did that I'm ashamed of, and I'm still ashamed of it to this day. I was playing the black pieces. against Victor Adler in the last round of the Minnesota Closed Championship. Now, in the Closed Championship, you play a round-robin event. Every player plays every other player. And there were three really strong players in the closed event that were over 2,400. There was Victor Adler, there was John Bartholomew, and there was Leonard Johnson, which is why I'm a little fuzzy on when this was played. But it was years and years ago. And so I prepared really heavily for the top three guys, those three guys. And then there were two other players that were playing in the event that were kind of around my rating. There was Don Aldrich, and there was Joe Longen, and there was me. And I prepared less so for Don Aldrich and Joe Longen. I had the white pieces against both of them. I said, "Oh, I'll take care of them, no problem." So, and what ended up happening was I had really good openings against the top three guys, and I actually I drew this game against Victor Adler, which I'm ashamed of. I drew the game against John Bartholomew, which I'm also kind of ashamed of. I had an advantage against John Bartholomew as well, and I got a good opening against Leonard Johnson, but then he ended up actually beating me. He won that game, so I ended up getting 1 point out of 3 against the top guys, and I scored badly against the bottom half of the tournament as well. I scored 1/2 point out of a possible 2 against the 2 lower guys, so I did terrible with the white pieces as well. So I've got 1 point going into the last round, playing against the guy that's leading the tournament, International Master Victor Adler. And the guy in second place in the tournament was Leonard Johnson. He was coming in second in the tournament. And, Leonard had to, do well in his game, obviously. And but he was counting on me to do well in my game, because that was the only way he could catch Victor. And I had some really good preparation against Victor Adler. Like, I played an idea, so it was after e4, c5. Now, back then, this was a new idea. Now, maybe it wouldn't be anything special. But he played this bishop b5 check line, which I was expecting, because this was in his repertoire. And then he played pawn to c3, and I didn't know what to do against this, but I had a bunch of prep beforehand where I came up with a really cool idea against this, because I'd seen him play this opening many, many times, and I played a move that was just relatively unplayed here, which was this move pawn to d5. So basically turning it into a type of c3 Sicilian, but maybe, taking him out of his book. And it went incredibly well. He played e takes d5, queen takes d5, d4, e6, queen a4, I just developed. He played knight a3, queen back to d7, takes, rook d1, queen to e7, and then he made this horrifically bad move here. He played this move pawn to b4, allowing this really cool sacrifice of my bishop and knight for rook and 3 pawns. So after queen d1, I did something terrible. I castled kingside and offered a draw to Victor Adler. Now, if you look at this on an engine, Black's position is if you look at it on a modern engine, Black's position is like +3. Like, I have a huge advantage here. Okay, now, Leonard Johnson was counting on me to go for it in this game. He was counting on me to be like, okay, this is my chance to beat an international master, with the black pieces. I'm a young, up-and-coming player that should be ambitious, should be trying to beat these guys. I should be trying to get full points against international masters, to help my game. I should be pressing. And of course, Leonard had told me after the game, if I'd had this position against Victor Adler, he'd be resigning in 4 or 5 more moves. And I have to agree with him. If I had this position today against Victor Adler, hopefully he'd be resigning in another 3 or 4 moves. Black has a huge advantage here. White can't anchor his pieces. His position has exploded. His king is incredibly unsafe. There's nothing here. It's terrible. And, yeah, I took a draw in this position. I initiated the draw. I wanted the draw. And I just desperately wanted to get a draw against this international master. And it was absolutely wrong, because I was really being... I wasn't being considerate of the other players in the tournament. The other players were counting on me to play this game, not to take a draw. They were counting on me to play this game. And that brings me back to everything going wrong with this entire controversy. Magnus Carlsen is acting in a way that completely ignores his fellow competitors. When you withdraw from a tournament, or when you play 2 moves in a game and then quit, you're not just disrespecting Hans Niemann. You're not making a protest just against one player. You are disrespecting the entire tournament, you're disrespecting the tournament organizers, and you're disrespecting all the other players that have to play in that event. And the way that Hans Niemann is behaving is also unethical, and also shows a lack of etiquette. And of course, the way that this is trickling down into the rest of the chess community, where younger players are seeing this behavior and they're copying it and they're emulating it, I think is absolutely terrible. And I think that it's something that we need to address. I think that it's something we need to talk about. These players are both supposed to be role models, and neither one of them is acting like it. And I think that we need to bring back a certain level of respectability to the game, and a certain level of ethical behavior, and a certain level of etiquette that I was fortunate enough to learn when I was a younger player, and I was fortunate enough to have this etiquette passed down to me. But I think now we have a responsibility to pass this etiquette down to the next generation. And these top players have an obligation and responsibility to pass that etiquette down as well. And I think FIDE as an organization, regardless of what they come up with their investigation, I think we need to have some sort of sanction against Magnus Carlsen to let people know that this behavior is not acceptable and that we need to bring back ethics and etiquette. And I do think that at the very least, just for the behaviors that Hans Niemann has shown in some of these events with refusing to analyze his games, etc., we need some sanctions on him as well, just to say, look, this is unethical behavior. It might not be extremely explicitly written out in the rules that you're not allowed to do this or allowed to do this, but this is not acceptable behavior, and it's disrespectful to the game of chess, it's disrespectful to the organizers, and it's disrespectful to the fans, and it's disrespectful to your fellow players. And we need to start putting our foot down and saying that this is not correct and that we should not be doing this. And I think that that is a much bigger issue than whether or not somebody actually cheated. So anyways, I hope that you found this video helpful. I hope you found this video interesting. I hope this wasn't too controversial, and I hope you learned something new about chess. Thank you very much for watching.